Hello, everyone. This issue in organizational communication lesson is about motivation and engagement. And because of the issues I was having with technology, I've decided to split this lesson into two parts. So in this first part, we're going to introduce the ideas of motivation and engagement, why they're important to organizations, and discuss some of workplace motivation. In the second half of the show, we will look at engagement programs. As always, I encourage you to have pencil and paper nearby, pen and paper nearby, so you can take notes and answer questions that relate to these issues. There are a couple of questions I want you to consider, and they hit at the two main themes that we'll be looking at in this lesson. The first question is, what incentives does your organization use to motivate you? Bonus pay, recognition, awards programs, etc. These are things that are sort of part of your performance appraisal, rewards that might come to you as a result of doing good work on your basic job. The second question is about any perks your organization has, things that are extra, sort of outside your job description or performance reward system. Things like take your dog to work days, happy hours, and that sort of thing. The final question ties the two of them together. Which of these incentives or perks make you more productive? Do either of these things do? What increases your willingness to do work, to do more work for your organization? Over the next few minutes, we will be looking at, and over the two lessons, we will be looking at the following issues. Why companies are motivated by motivation and engagement efforts. The movement or the evolution in a worker's career from just being motivated as part of the regular duties for the job to engagement, and defining what those things mean. And then in each case, looking at communication and how they drive both motivation and engagement. So why do we have this identified as an issue for organizations to look at? Well, the big answer, or the basic answer, I guess, is because there's a lot of money spent on employees and keeping them motivated and engaged. Generally, as we discussed last week during the human relations frame, there's generally considered to be a link between satisfaction and productivity. That happier workers who feel their needs are being met are more likely to be productive. Of course, productivity influences an organization's financial bottom line. So if employees can do more work with some incentives, and if that work contributes to something that's an essential business function, then it's important to see how productivity can be managed. The other truth of this is that employees are often the greatest expense in most organizations. Between salary and benefits, the cost of training people, even the cost of recruiting and interviewing them, employees are by far the biggest expense most organizations face. That is, unfortunately, one reason why, when organizations are facing tough economic times, employee layoffs are one of the first ways they try to rein in costs. U.S. companies, and this is specifically toward thinking about employee engagement programs and training related to that, U.S. companies have spent nearly $1 billion on engagement programs. They first became popular in the mid-1990s. Engagement itself was a buzzword. It was thought about after a recession in the 90s, where people thought that there might be alternative ways of getting employees more productive without necessarily paying them additional money. That notion has since been dispelled a little bit, but the idea here is that engagement is a way of helping workers to be not only more productive, but be all they can be. And an industry has grown up around this. So we'll talk about this more in the second lesson, but the amount of money spent on employee engagement program, at least just in the U.S., is approaching $1 billion. Despite all this investment, the level of engagement remains, according to some people, either stagnant or low. The Gallup organization does an engagement survey every year, and they reported that less than 20% of employees worldwide felt that they were engaged. The Aon survey that I asked you to read as part of the reading for this assignment reported that only about 60% of employees across their the survey area were engaged. Now, there is a wide disparity in figures between the major research organizations on this, but the fact of the matter is a lot of organizations believe they're spending a lot of money on motivation and engagement, and they're not exactly sure what they're getting for their investment. More on that when we wrap up this lesson in the second section. So we'll first turn our attention to motivation and then talk about engagement. But I think it's very important for us to define terms. These two words are probably the most ill-defined terms in management and organizational communication. A recent blogger asked HR professionals from around the world to define engagement, and they came back with 50 different definitions that hit on 50 different aspects of the process and programs related to engagement. So these are the definitions that I'll be using throughout this lesson. I tend to think there are some of the more common definitions of both motivation and engagement. So first, motivation. Motivation is the willingness to perform one's work to the standards expected by the organization. So if you are hired into an organization and they say you need to write 50 press releases a month to meet the standards that we think are good for a media relations person, then your willingness to do that and to do it continually month after month and contribute to the organization's bottom line, that is motivation. Most people come in with a certain base level of motivation. You're motivated to take the job that you applied for and those sorts of things. But motivation programs and reward systems help reinforce that decision to do the work that you've been hired to do, and also to do more of it when the time is required by the organization. Engagement, on the other hand, is defined by Aon, the reading that you had to read for this lesson, as the level of an employee's psychological investment in their organization. This goes beyond just merely showing up for work and meeting performance marks, but turning that basic motivation into a psychological investment that helps you unlock the creativity that you might use to I like to think of the distinction between motivation and engagement as being part of a continuum. At the bottom line, the basic level is just doing the job that you were hired to do. Motivation means you go beyond that job a little bit, or seek to reach higher organizational goals and performance indicators, while engagement suggests that you're more fully invested in helping the organization achieve its goals and for you to develop personally. Another way of thinking about this, and this is going back to the human relations frame that we looked at last week, is the kinds of needs that we need to satisfy in order to be motivated. You may recall our old pal Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. Motivation at its sort of basic level looks at some of the physical, satisfying some of the physical and safety needs that almost all employees have. The need for shelter, warmth, food, and drink. An organization and your job provides you with the means that are necessary to acquire those things. Safety needs, security, structure, and stability. These can be built into the job description and sort of work atmosphere of the organization itself. So that the fact that if you continue to do your job well, you can expect to be continually employed by the organization, that helps satisfy some of the safety needs that you have. The social needs are a bit of a transition point between mere motivation and being more engaged. Yes, there is a need for social interaction at work to help satisfy friendship needs and relationship needs. We're going to look at that in another lesson. But that's also the the beginning point for engagement work that taps into the more creative parts of your interaction and collaboration with others to help achieve organizational goals. Then engagement taps into the higher level needs: self-esteem, reputation, advancement in the organization, and then self-actualization, growing more, learning more, becoming a greater person, if you would, than you were when you first began working at an organization. In turn, what the organization expects is that the greater investment will lead to greater productivity and new ideas and ways of helping the organization achieve its business goals. We'll turn our attention now in this first part of the lesson to communication and motivation. What are some of the communication behaviors that help motivate workers and satisfy some of the lower level needs? The first one is one that we don't usually think of if we're thinking of public relations or corporate communication and the sort of jobs that those people do, and that's having a clearly defined job description. This goes back to Weber and to a certain extent Frederick Taylor, but the idea that your job duties and responsibilities are clearly defined and clearly written, clearly laid out. This is normally an HR function, human resources function in an organization, but having a clear job description is the baseline for motivation. If I understand what I'm supposed to do, then I'm probably going to be more motivated to do it, and can get on with the work as opposed to being confused about what it is my job duties are. The second related idea is the notion of performance expectations. That is, okay, I have my job duties. Now, what are the performance indicators that suggest I'm doing that job well and I'm helping meet the organization's expectations for what my job is? Those could be things like in sales for a particular quota for the month, in a customer call service operation, the number of calls that you handle, the satisfaction level of the customers, the speed with which you handle those calls. There are some positions in organizations where performance indicators, performance expectations are a little fuzzier, and these relate to developing programs and those kinds of things. But I will say for both job descriptions and performance expectations, in an ideal workplace, the manager and the employee would collaborate on identifying what those expectations and job descriptions are. Again, that's a communication function where you meet with your manager and say, what targets do you want me to hit? Where do you want me to go? How can I contribute? Related to those two things, then, is feedback on how the employee is meeting those expectations. A manager's communication toward an employee is identifying where an employee is doing things well and where they are falling short of the things that need to happen in order for the organization to meet its goals. All of these first three things are communication behaviors between a worker and his or her manager, and also sort of further up the organization as they develop expectations and policy and job descriptions and things. But that feedback should be regular, continual, written down, recorded, and tracked so that an employee can understand how they're doing and where they fit in the organization. This is where a lot of us begin to think of the motivational part of motivation, and that is the rewards for meeting expectations. You have to understand all the other things first, but if you do them and if you meet performance expectations, how are you rewarded? Obviously, the basic reward for most employees is pay, and then more pay if you do well. But there are other rewards that can come from doing work well. You might earn praise and commendations from superiors and others around the organization. You could enhance your reputation with others around the organization by doing a good job. You may be up for an award or recognition, kind of an employee of the month sort of things. There are a variety of things that organizations can do. As I mentioned a little earlier, in tough economic times, there was a movement toward rewarding behavior that did not involve money, and or at least very much money on the part of the organization. This is still an impetus, but again, I think more organizations are coming to grips with the idea that pay for performance is an important part of the expenses that they have to take into account when judging the financial health of the organization. You might remember that when you were creating your own hotels last weekend, that some of you were a little generous with the employee benefits and rewards that employees got, and when the economy took a little bit of a turn, you had to rethink your strategy for rewarding employee behavior. The final aspect of communication and motivation is creating an atmosphere in which people begin to meet their social needs. As I mentioned a few moments ago, that the social needs level in Maslow's hierarchy is a bit of a transition between mere motivation and engaging employees. This is sort of where the perks come in. That is, your ability to interact with other people sort of outside of work or in a different kind of atmosphere than just doing the job. And so a lot of it also relates to helping employees satisfy some of the needs for an outlet for some of the stresses of the job and the security and safety that come from sort of wellness and mental health. So having a catered lunch, for instance, every day. Having video games in the workroom so that you can blow off some steam, table tennis, basketball leagues for employees to compete against each other and sometimes against other companies. All of those things are ways of helping to meet a variety of needs. The big challenge, of course, is that many of these things also cost money. Management might wonder why there is a video game or several video games in the employee workroom when people should be working, and the video games systems cost money to install and maintain. Similarly, customers might wonder why they're paying a lot for a product when they hear about some of the perks that employees get. They say, I'd rather pay less for the product and know that than know that my the people who put it together get to play video games on their break time. Good companies with a good reputation have a good reputation for treating their employees well, and so many customers perhaps, will understand the investment that goes into that. But you need to be somewhat cautious of the message that having some of the perks sends to customers and other investors in the company. With that, we come to the end of part one. The second part of this lesson can be found on another link, and I encourage you to go to that now.